Settle in and listen. Some stories are written in glory, with heroes as bright as a summer sun. This ain't one of them. This story is etched in scars, whispered in shadows, and tastes of gunpowder and regret. It's about a man who tried to bury his past, only to find that some ghosts refused to lie still. It's a tale of a town called Grey Hollow, a place that had sold its soul, and the prodigal son who rode back into hell to buy it back. The year of our Lord 1876 was a time of progress and forgetting. The nation was celebrating its centennial, stitching together the ragged wounds of a civil war with parades and promises, looking forward to a future of industry and steel. But in the remote, forgotten corners of the West, the past was not so easily paved over. It clung to the land like a stubborn frost, and in a place like Grey Hollow, nestled in the stark and forgiving mountains of Montana, the past was the only thing that seemed to have a future. Cole Thatcher had spent 10 years trying to outrun it. He had ridden away from Grey Hollow as a boy of 19, his hands stained with blood and gunpowder. A fearsome reputation as a gunfighter, the reaper of the Rockies already clinging to him like a shroud. He had fought in the war, on the losing side, and had seen enough killing to last 10 lifetimes. After the surrender, he had drifted, taking jobs that required a fast gun and a cold heart, trying to burn away the memory of his home with whiskey and violence. He had seen the elephant, as they said, and it had trampled his soul into the dust. Now, at 29, he was riding back. The man who returned was a pale echo of the fearsome gunfighter. He was gaunt and weary, his face a roadmap of hard miles and harder memories. A deep, ragged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, a souvenir from a Union bayonet at Shiloh, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent, bitter line. His eyes, a piercing gray, held the haunted, thousand-yard stare of a man who has seen too much of the world's darkness. He was no longer a killer. He was a ghost, and he was coming home for the sole purpose of burying another one. A single, terse letter had found him in a dusty Texas town, a missive from the town preacher in Grey Hollow. His mother was dead. The one person in the world who had ever looked at him and seen a son instead of a monster was gone. The love she had carried for him was the last, frayed tether connecting him to his own humanity. He was returning not to mourn, for he felt he had lost the capacity for such a clean emotion, but to perform a final duty. He would see her buried, stand over her grave, and then he would ride away and never, ever look back. As he rode over the last rise, Grey Hollow came into view, cradled in its valley like a corpse in a coffin. The town had changed. It seemed harder, sharper. There were new buildings, a grand new saloon with painted glass windows, and a formidable, 2-story stone building that served as the mayor's office and the courthouse. But the prosperity felt wrong, brittle. The few people he saw on the streets moved with a furtive, hunched-over quality, their eyes darting nervously, as if they were all afraid of being seen. The air, which should have been crisp with the scent of pine, was thick with a palpable and spoken fear. He rode down the main street, a stranger in the land of his birth. He saw faces he vaguely recognized from his youth, now etched with a decade of hardship and a new and settling anxiety. They looked at him, their eyes widening for a moment in recognition, before they quickly looked away, hurrying on their way as if his very presence was a contagion. The prodigal son had returned, and the fatted calf was nowhere in sight. His first stop was the undertaker's. He arranged for his mother's burial, paying in cash from a worn leather purse. The undertaker, a man with a face like dried leather, took his money and offered no condolences, only a furtive, nervous glance toward the street. His second stop was the church, to speak with the preacher who had written to him. He found the man, Reverend Michaels, sweeping the steps, his movements frail and defeated. The preacher was an old man now, his back bent, the fire of faith in his eyes dimmed to a pilot light. "Cole," the Reverend said, his voice a dry rustle, "I'm glad you came. Your mother, she never stopped praying for you." "Her prayers were wasted," Cole replied, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Tell me what happened." The Reverend hesitated, casting a nervous look up and down the empty street. She was frail. Her heart gave out. The town doctor was very kind. The words were rote, recited, lacking any genuine conviction. "The town has seen a lot of progress, Cole. Under Mayor Braxton." The name hung in the air between them. Eli Braxton. He had been Cole's father's best friend, a man who was like an uncle to him. A man who had always been there with a kind word and a helping hand. "Braxton is the mayor?" Cole asked, a flicker of surprise cutting through his weariness. "He's more than the mayor, son," the Reverend whispered, leaning closer. "He is the town. He has brought prosperity, yes. But it has come at a price. A very high price." The old man's eyes pleaded with Cole for a moment, a silent, desperate cry for help, before the fear returned and he looked away. "It's best you bury your mother and move on. There's nothing for you here anymore. This place, it's hollow now." Cole left the preacher to his sweeping and his fear. He walked the streets of his youth, a ghost on a pilgrimage. He passed his family's old homestead on the edge of town. It was abandoned, the windows boarded up, the fields fallow. He stood there for a long time, the memories washing over him. Memories of his father, a hard but decent man, killed in a mining accident. Memories of his mother's gentle hands. And a sharper, more painful memory. The memory of a girl with eyes the color of a summer sky and a laugh that could charm the birds from the trees. June, his adopted sister, taken in by his mother after her own parents died of fever. The girl he had loved with a fierce, protective passion. The girl who had died in a fire that had consumed the town orphanage 2 years after he had left. Her death had been the final stone that had sealed the tomb of his heart. He made his way to the new saloon, the Golden Nugget. It was far grander than the old watering hole he remembered. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the low murmur of cautious conversation. He walked to the bar and ordered a whiskey, his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room. He saw them immediately. Braxton's men. They were easy to spot. They were not locals. They were hard-faced men with new guns and the predatory stillness of wolves. They were not deputies. They were enforcers. And their eyes, like the eyes of everyone else in town, were full of fear. But their fear was different. It was the fear of a master they dared not displease. Cole Thatcher had come to Grey Hollow to bury his mother and his past. But as he stood in that saloon, the whiskey tasteless in his mouth, he felt the cold, familiar tendrils of that past wrapping round him. The town was sick. Its soul was cankered. And the name of the disease was Eli Braxton. Cole didn't want any part of it. He was done with fighting. He was done with killing. He would dig a grave, say a prayer he didn't believe, and ride into the sunset. But as he looked at the frightened faces in the room, he had the sinking feeling that the past was not yet done with him. Grey Hollow had ghosts, and he was beginning to realize he wasn't the only one. Eli Braxton ruled Grey Hollow from his office on the second floor of the new stone courthouse, a building that was both a symbol of his authority and a fortress. He was a man who had mastered the art of appearance. To the casual observer, he was the model of a benevolent leader. He was in his late 50s, with a mane of distinguished silver hair, a well-trimmed beard, and a wardrobe of fine, tailored suits that spoke of Eastern money and sophistication. His voice was a rich, reassuring baritone, the voice of a man accustomed to command, but who chose to persuade. He spoke of community, of shared prosperity, of a bright future for Grey Hollow. But beneath this carefully polished veneer was a man forged in the crucible of greed and paranoia. Braxton's friendship with Cole's father, Thomas Thatcher, had been genuine, once. They had been partners, prospecting the mountains together. But it was Thomas who had the uncanny knack for finding the color, and Eli who had the talent for managing the business. When Thomas died in a tragic mine collapse, Eli had discreetly helped along with a few well-placed charges of dynamite. Eli had been the one to comfort the grieving widow and her son, all while using his partner's maps to secure the claims to the richest veins of silver and gold in the territory. This hidden wealth was the foundation of his empire. He had built the new Grey Hollow on a bedrock of fear. He had systematically bought out or driven out any landowner who opposed him, his offers backed by the silent, menacing presence of the hired guns he kept on his payroll. The town doctor, the preacher, the undertaker, they were all his men, in one way or another, their silence bought with his gold or guaranteed by his threats. He was the law, the bank, and the church, all rolled into one. He was a king in his own small, isolated kingdom. The news of Cole Thatcher's return had reached him within minutes of his arrival. His network of informants was brutally efficient. He stood at his window, much as Cole had stood in the street, and watched the ghost of his past ride into town. He felt not fear, but a cold, calculating annoyance. Cole was a loose end, a dangerous, unpredictable variable in his perfectly controlled equation. He had hoped the war or a stray bullet in some nameless saloon would have taken care of the boy years ago. He summoned his chief enforcer, a man known only as Clay. Clay was a tall, cadaverous man with dead, black eyes and a stillness that was more unsettling than any overt threat. He was Braxton's shadow, the instrument of his will, the man who handled the bloody business that kept the mayor's own hands clean. "Cole Thatcher is back," Braxton said, without turning from the window. "I saw," Clay replied, his voice a dry whisper. "He came for the funeral." "He came for a funeral," Braxton corrected him. "We need to make sure it is not mine. I want to know why he is here. I want to know his intentions." "Does he know anything?" "He was just a boy when his father died," Clay rasped. "He knows nothing." "He is not a boy anymore, Clay," Braxton said, finally turning, his eyes as hard and cold as river stones. "He is the reaper of the Rockies. Or have you forgotten the stories? He is his father's son. He has his father's instincts. And this town is full of things that a man with good instincts might start to question." Braxton paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I want to extend to him a proper welcome. A mayor's welcome. Invite him to my office. This evening. We will talk, old friend to old friend, son. I will gauge what he knows, what he wants. And then we will decide how to proceed." That evening, as dusk settled over the valley, Clay found Cole in the saloon. He delivered the mayor's invitation not as a request, but as a command. Cole, wanting to get the measure of the man his Uncle Eli had become, agreed. He was led up the grand staircase of the courthouse to Braxton's office. The room was a monument to power and wealth, with a large mahogany desk, leather-bound books that had never been read, and a window that offered a king's view of the town below. Eli Braxton rose to greet him, his hand extended, a warm, paternal smile on his face. It was a masterful performance. "Cole, my boy," Braxton boomed, his voice full of feigned warmth. "It is so good to see you. A sad occasion, I know. Your mother was a saint, a true saint. The whole town mourns her." Cole did not take his hand. He stood in the center of the room, his gaunt frame and scarred face a stark, grim contrast to Braxton's opulent surroundings. "Hello, Eli," he said, his voice flat. "Please, sit," Braxton said, his smile not faltering as he gestured to a plush leather chair. He poured two glasses of expensive brandy. "It has been too long. 10 years. The war. It was hard on us all. But we have persevered. We have built something here, Cole. Something your father and I always dreamed of." "My father dreamed of a decent life," Cole said, his voice quiet but sharp. "He didn't dream of this." He let his gaze sweep around the luxurious office. Braxton's smile finally tightened. "Times change, Cole. A town must have a leader, a firm hand to guide it. I have provided that. I have brought prosperity where there was only dust." He leaned forward, his expression turning serious, confidential. "I know this must be difficult for you, but Gray Hollow is not the town you remember. It is my town now. I would advise you, for your own good, to bury your dear mother, pay your respects, and ride on. The past is a dead thing, my boy. It is best to let it lie." It was a warning, delivered with the smooth, practiced charm of a master manipulator. But Cole heard the threat calling beneath the words. He also sensed something else, a flicker of deep-seated anxiety in Braxton's eyes. The mayor was not as confident as he appeared. He was afraid of something. "The past has a funny way of digging itself up," Cole said, his gray eyes locking with Braxton's. He pushed the untouched glass of brandy back across the desk. "Thank you for the welcome, Mayor. But I prefer to drink with men I trust." He stood up, turned his back on the sputtering mayor, and walked out of the office. The meeting had told him everything he needed to know. Eli Braxton was not just a greedy man, he was a guilty one. And he was hiding something he was terrified Cole might uncover. The prodigal son had been officially warned to leave town. And in that moment, for the first time, a small, stubborn part of him began to consider the possibility of staying. The ghosts of Gray Hollow were whispering, and Cole Thatcher was beginning to listen. The funeral was a sparse, bleak affair. Cole stood by the freshly dug grave next to his father's, the only mourners himself, Reverend Michaels, and the undertaker, who seemed anxious to be finished. The rest of the town stayed away, a clear and deliberate message. The son of Thomas Thatcher was an outcast, a pariah. As the last shovelful of dirt was patted into place, Cole felt the final tether to his past snap. There was nothing left for him here. He would honor his original plan. He would leave at dawn. He spent his last night not in a boarding house, but in the cold, abandoned shell of his family's homestead. He built a small fire on the stone hearth, the flames pushing back the ghosts for a little while. He was running a hand over the names Cole and June carved into the mantelpiece when he heard a noise outside. A soft, furtive scratching at the back door. His hand went to his Colt by pure instinct. He moved to the door, his body a coiled spring of tension. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice a low growl. A child's voice, trembling with fear, answered him. Is you Mr. Thatcher?" "Mr. Cole Thatcher." Cole opened the door a crack. A young boy, no older than 10, stood there, his face smudged with dirt, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. He was clutching a small, grimy object in his hand. "I am," Cole said, his voice softening slightly. "What do you want, son?" She told me to give this to you," the boy stammered, thrusting the object at Cole. "She said you was the only one. She said to tell you. The mockingbird still sings at midnight." The boy then turned and bolted, disappearing into the darkness like a frightened rabbit. Cole looked down at the object in his hand. It was a small, crudely carved wooden bird, a mockingbird. His breath caught in his throat. It was a feeling he thought he had lost forever, a sharp, painful jolt of pure, undiluted memory. He and June used to carve them as children. It was their secret sign, their private language. And the phrase, "the mockingbird still sings at midnight," was their code, something they had invented for their childhood games, meaning "I'm in trouble, come find me." His mind reeled. It was impossible. June was dead. She had died in the orphanage fire 8 years ago. The town had mourned. He had received a letter from his mother, her words a testament to her heartbreak. It was a cruel joke, a prank, but the carving, it was perfect, down to the small, flawed notch on the left wing that only he and she knew how to make. The implications of it were so staggering that he felt a wave of dizziness. If June was alive, where had she been? And why was she in trouble now? The orphanage fire. Had it been a lie? A cover-up? His decision was made in an instant. The plan to leave at dawn evaporated. He was no longer a man running from his past. He was a man running toward it. He had to know the truth. He spent the rest of the night moving through the town's shadows, his old skills returning to him with a grim familiarity. He needed information. He started at the town records office, which was housed in the courthouse basement. He picked the lock with a rust-honed skill and slipped inside. He lit a match and began to search through the dusty, leather-bound ledgers. He found the record of the orphanage fire. It was brief, clinical. 8 children and the headmistress dead. Cause, faulty stovepipe. Case closed. But then he found the deed to the orphanage land. It had been sold a week after the fire, for a pittance, to a holding company. A holding company whose president was listed as Eli Braxton. His next stop was the ruins of the orphanage itself, at the far end of town. It was a blackened, skeletal ruin, a place the townspeople avoided. He moved through the debris, the ghosts of dead children seeming to whisper in the wind. He found the cellar, its stone walls still intact. And there, scratched into the soft stone of the back wall, hidden behind a loose rock, he found it. A series of hash marks, a prisoner's calendar, and a single, freshly carved word, June. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. June was alive, and she was Braxton's prisoner. The fire had been a lie, a brutal, efficient way for Braxton to acquire the land and eliminate any witnesses. But why keep June alive? What did she know? What did she have that made her more valuable alive than dead? He now had a new purpose. It was no longer the cold, abstract quest for revenge for a dead brother. It was a hot, desperate, immediate need to save the only family he had left. He thought back to the boy, to the message. The mockingbird still sings at midnight. It wasn't just a code. It was a location. The old town clock tower, which had been decommissioned years ago, had a bell that was struck only once a day, at midnight, powered by a strange, independent mechanism his father had designed. It was a place only he and June would know was a safe, secret meeting spot. He had a destination. He had a purpose. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that to save June, he would have to become the man he had spent 10 years trying to kill. He would have to become the Reaper once more. His quest was no longer about 3 bullets for 3 names. It was about 1 life, against an entire town of lies. The clock tower of Grey Hollow was a skeletal finger pointing a silent accusation at the sky. It stood in the center of the old town square, a relic from a more optimistic time, its clock face frozen at 3:15, its bell long silent but for the single, automated chime at midnight. To the rest of the town, it was a useless, decaying structure. To Cole and June, it had been their castle, their secret fortress, a place to escape the world of adults. As the town slept under a sliver of a moon, Cole made his way toward it. He moved not like a man, but like a shadow, his scarred face a grim mask of determination. The town that had been his home was now enemy territory. Every dark alley could hold an ambush, every window a rifle barrel. He could feel the eyes of Braxton's enforcers, a constant, unseen pressure. He was being watched. He reached the base of the tower and slipped inside its dusty, cavernous interior. The air was thick with the smell of decay and forgotten time. He began the long, spiraling climb up the rickety wooden staircase, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt, every creak of the old wood a potential betrayal. He reached the belfry just as the intricate system of gears and counterweights his father had designed began to whir and click into life. A massive iron hammer drew back and then struck the great bronze bell. The single, resonant bond of midnight rolled out over the sleeping town, a deep, mournful sound that seemed to shake the very bones of the tower. And in the echo of the bell, he heard a soft sob. She was huddled in the far corner of the belfry, a small, frail figure wrapped in a threadbare shawl. It took his eyes a moment to adjust to the dim light filtering through the louvered windows. When he saw her face, the breath left his lungs. It was June. But it was not the laughing, vibrant girl of his memories. This was a woman of 20, her face pale and thin, her eyes, once the color of a summer sky, now vast and dark with a deep, soul-crushing trauma. They were the eyes of a prisoner. June, he breathed, his voice a raw, broken thing. She looked up, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of the girl she had been. Cole, she whispered, and then she was in his arms, her thin body racked with sobs, a storm of grief and relief and 8 years of terror breaking loose. He held her, his own emotions a confusing, painful knot in his chest. The fortress he had built around his heart was crumbling. "I thought you were dead," he said, his voice thick. "I almost was," she replied, her voice muffled against his duster. The fire. It was a nightmare. Braxton's men, they started it. They were trying to kill us all. But one. I managed to get out through the cellar. I saw them. I saw everything. She pulled back, her eyes wild with a feverish intensity. "That's why he's kept me alive, Cole. It's not just what I saw. It's what I have." From beneath her shawl, she produced a worn, oilskin-wrapped package. "Our fathers. Yours and mine. They were partners before Braxton. They prospected this whole valley together. They found the mother lode, the Great Bear Vein. They filed the claim, drew the maps, and registered the original deed with the territorial office before Braxton ever came on the scene. My father kept the originals. He told me if anything ever happened to him, to keep them safe, that they were the valley's birthright." She unwrapped the package. Inside was a hand-drawn, meticulously detailed map of the entire Grey Hollow Valley, marking the location of the legendary Great Bear Vein. And with it was the original, legally stamped territorial deed, granting ownership of the entire valley including the land the town was built onto, a partnership between Thomas Thatcher and William Pryor, June's father. The entire truth slammed into Cole with the force of a physical blow. Braxton's entire empire town, the mines, his wealth was a fraud, built upon a foundation of stolen land and murder. This map and deed were the proof. They were a stick of dynamite that could blow his entire world to smithereens. This was why he had kept June alive, hidden away, trying for 8 years to torture or trick her into revealing the location of the documents. "He doesn't know I have them with me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He thinks they're still hidden somewhere. He keeps me locked up in the old SE office, in the cellar. I only managed to get out tonight because the boy, Sam, he's the stable boy, he feels sorry for me. He left my door unbolted." Their reunion was cut short by the sound of footsteps on the stairs below. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. They were not alone. "He must have followed the boy," June gasped, her face straining of all color. Cole's mind raced. There was only one way in or out. They were trapped at the top of the tower. He looked around the belfry, his gunfighter's mind assessing the terrain. He saw the massive bell, the thick bell rope coiling down into the darkness below. He had an idea, a desperate, reckless gamble. "Get behind the bell," he ordered June, his voice once again the cold, steady voice of the Reaper. He drew his Colt, the weight of it familiar, deadly. The footsteps grew closer. A figure appeared in the stairwell opening, a silhouette against the lantern light from below. It was Clay, Braxton's cadaverous enforcer, a shotgun held at the ready. "The girl comes with me, Thatcher," Clay rasped, his dead eyes fixing on Cole. "She's not going anywhere," Cole replied. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Clay raised the shotgun. Cole fired his Colt. The single shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet struck the great bronze bell, not Clay. The impact of the heavy .45 slug caused the massive bell to sing, a deep, vibrating boom that was both a sound and a physical force. The concussion staggered Clay, his own shotgun blast going wide, tearing a chunk out of the wooden roof. In that moment of disorientation, Cole acted. He grabbed the thick bell rope, swung his legs over the edge of the belfry, and with June clinging desperately to his back, he launched himself into the abyss. They plunged into the darkness of the tower's interior, the rough rope burning his hands, their descent a terrifying, controlled fall. They landed in a heap on the ground floor as Clay, recovering above, fired his shotgun down into the darkness, the buckshot peppering the space where they had been a second before. Cole, his hands dry and bleeding, dragged June to her feet and out into the night. They had escaped. But now they were fugitives in their own hometown, with the full force of Braxton's empire hunting them. And Cole had just used one of his 3 precious bullets. Not to kill an enemy, but to create a diversion. His clean, simple quest was becoming a messy, desperate war. The town of Grey Hollow, under the iron fist of Eli Braxton, was a place where dissent was not tolerated. But even in the most oppressed soil, seeds of rebellion can take root. The town's ghosts were not just the ones in Cole's past. They were the living, the people who had been wronged by Braxton, who lived in a state of quiet, simmering resentment. Cole and June, now the most wanted people in the valley, needed allies. And they found them in the most unlikely of places. Their first stop, after escaping the clock tower, was the one place they knew Braxton's men would be reluctant to make a scene, the church. They found Reverend Michaels asleep in his small quarters at the back. The old preacher, awakened by their sudden appearance, was terrified, but he saw the desperation in their eyes, and a flicker of the fire he thought had long since died was rekindled. "He's a devil, Cole," the Reverend whispered, after June had tearfully recounted her story. "He has profaned this town, this house of God. I have been a coward for too long." He agreed to hide them, offering them the sanctuary of the church's cellar, a small, damp space filled with old hymnals and forgotten relics. From this makeshift headquarters, Cole knew he had to gather more than just prayers. He needed firepower, and he needed information. He thought of the townspeople, of their averted eyes and their frightened silence. But he also remembered the few who had not looked away with fear, but with a deep, hidden anger. One of these was the town doctor, a man named Elias Vance. Dr. Vance was a man haunted by the number of accidents and unfortunate illnesses that had befallen those who had stood in Braxton's way. He was a man of science, but he knew evil when he saw it. Cole, using the cover of darkness and the network of back alleys he knew from his youth, slipped away from the church and appeared at the doctor's back door. Vance, a man in his late 60s with a weary but intelligent face, was not surprised to see him. "I've been wondering when someone would finally come knocking, son," he said, letting Cole in. "I treated your father after the accident. It wasn't a cave-in. It was a blast. And your mother. Her heart was weak, yes. But a man from the mayor's office paid me a visit the day before she passed. A friendly reminder that a woman in her condition could be easily agitated, and that it would be a tragedy if her son were to hear any disturbing news." Dr. Vance had become a silent chronicler of Braxton's crimes. He had kept his own secret journal, a record of the dead and the intimidated. He pledged his support, offering not guns, but his knowledge of the town's secrets and his access to its people. He would be their eyes and ears, a spy in the heart of the enemy's camp. The final piece of their nascent rebellion came from an even more unexpected source. As Cole was returning to the church, a figure stepped out of the shadows of an alley, a shotgun held loosely but purposefully. It was the one-eyed liveryman, Jeb. "Heard what you did at the clock tower," Jeb grunted, his one good eye glinting in the moonlight. About time someone rattled his cage. Jeb, Cole learned, had owned a small but prosperous ranch before Braxton arrived. Braxton had wanted his land, which had access to a key river. When Jeb refused to sell, a mysterious fire had destroyed his barn and his home, and he had lost his eye trying to save his horses. He had been broken, forced to take a menial job, his anger festering for years. "There are others," Jeb said. "Men who've been wronged. Men who are just waiting for a sign, for a leader." Over the next few days, a secret alliance began to form. Jeb became the recruiter, speaking in hushed tones to a handful of other dispossessed ranchers and miners, men who had lost everything to Braxton and had nothing left to lose. They were not an army. They were a small, desperate band of ghosts, a collection of grudges and grievances. Their headquarters was the church cellar, their leader was a gunfighter with 2 bullets left, and their hope was a girl who held the town's true history in her hands. Braxton, meanwhile, was turning the town upside down. He had declared Cole and June to be dangerous criminals, murderers responsible for the death of an orphanage full of children. He offered a massive reward for their capture, dead or alive. His enforcers, led by the silent, deadly Clay, were everywhere, kicking in doors, harassing citizens, their brutal methods exposing the true nature of Braxton's rule to the terrified townspeople. The mask of the benevolent leader had slipped, revealing the tyrant beneath. In the damp cellar of the church, surrounded by his small, and likely band of rebels, Cole laid out the map and the deed. The flickering lantern light illuminated their faces, a collection of hardened, desperate men, and one determined young woman. "This is the proof," Cole said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm. "This is what we're fighting for. Not just for revenge, but for the soul of this town." He was no longer a lone ghost on a personal vendetta. He was the reluctant leader of a rebellion. His war for the past had become a fight for the future, and he knew that it would end, as it had to, in blood and fire. The ghosts of Grey Hollow were finally gathering for their last stand. Eli Braxton's paranoia, fed by Cole's escape and the nerving silence from the town's resentful underbelly, had reached a fever pitch. He knew Cole and June were still in Grey Hollow. He could feel their presence like a cancer in his own body. His enforcers had torn the town apart, but the fugitives had vanished as if into thin air, and the townspeople, when questioned, responded with a dull, maddening wall of silent ignorance. Braxton knew this silence was not born of ignorance, but of defiance. The town was a powder keg, and he decided the only way to regain control was to light the match himself. He chose the Sabbath as his stage. He knew the entire town would be gathered in one place, a captive audience for the sermon of fear he intended to deliver. As Reverend Michaels was in the middle of a shaky, uninspired sermon about forgiveness, the heavy church doors burst open. Eli Braxton strode in, flanked by a dozen of his hired guns, including the menacing, silent Clay. They moved down the aisle with the arrogance of conquerors, their spurs ringing a blasphemous rhythm on the hallowed floorboards. The congregation froze, their prayers dying on their lips. Braxton mounted the pulpit, shoving the frail reverend aside. He looked out over the sea of frightened faces, his own face a mask of righteous fury. "I have been a patient and benevolent leader to you all," he began, his rich baritone filling the church. "I have brought you prosperity. I have given you security. And how do you repay me? You harbor criminals. You shelter a man who is a known killer, and a girl who is a murderer of children." He let his accusations hang in the air, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "This defiance ends today. The fugitives, Cole Thatcher and the girl June, are a sickness in this town. And I am the cure. I know they are here. I know some of you are helping them. From this moment on, anyone caught aiding them, speaking to them, or withholding information about them will be considered an enemy of Grey Hollow. And they will be dealt with as such. There will be a house-to-house search. There will be interrogations. We will cut this cancer out, I promise you." It was a declaration of total war against his own people. But Braxton had made a critical, arrogant miscalculation. He did not know that the very ground beneath his feet was the heart of the rebellion. In the damp cellar below the pulpit, Cole, June, Jeb, and a handful of their men listened to his threats through the floorboards. Cole knew this was the moment. Braxton had gathered all of his enforcers in one place, a perfect, concentrated target. He had brought the war to them. It was time to deliver their response. "Jeb," Cole whispered, his voice a low, urgent command. "You and the man, the back entrance. Create a diversion. Draw as many of them outside as you can. June, you stay here with the Reverend. Bar the cellar door. Do not come out, no matter what you hear." He looked at the small, desperate group. "This is it. We show him today that the ghosts of this town can bite back." As Braxton was reaching the crescendo of his tirade, the church's rear vestry door suddenly burst open. Jeb and 3 of his ranchers opened fire into the air, their shotguns letting out a deafening roar. "The jig is up, Braxton," Jeb bellowed. "Your time is over." Chaos erupted. The congregation screamed and dove under the pews. Braxton's men, startled, spun around, returning fire toward the back of the church. Just as Cole had predicted, bulk of them, including Clay, charged toward the rear, eager to crush this pathetic little uprising. This was the diversion Cole needed. While the main firefight raged at the back of the church, Cole emerged from a hidden panel behind the altar, a relic from the church's days as a stop on a missionary trail. He moved with a chilling, silent grace, a ghost in the house of God. He was not heading for Braxton. His target was the small group of guards who had remained at the front, protecting their leader. The battle for the church was a swirling, brutal ballet of violence. At the back, Jeb and his men, using the thick walls of the vestry for cover, engaged in a desperate, ferocious firefight with Clay and the main body of enforcers. In the center, the townspeople cowered, caught in a crossfire of splintering wood and flying lead. And at the front, Cole Thatcher became the Reaper once more. He was a whirlwind of calculated, lethal motion. He used the ornate pews and the altar as cover, his movements fluid and unpredictable. He was not a man anymore, he was a series of angles and trajectories. He fired his Colt only once, his second to last bullet. The shot was not wasted. It took out the lead guard just as the man was turning, a perfect, economical kill. The other 2 guards he dispatched with a brutal, close-quarters efficiency, using his knife and the heavy butt of his empty pistol. He moved through the chaos of the gunfight not as a participant, but as a force of nature, his purpose singular and absolute. Within a minute, the only people left at the front of the church were Cole and a stunned, terrified Eli Braxton, who was fumbling to reload his own pistol. Cole stood before the pulpit, his scarred face impassive in the smoky, sulphurous air. He held his Colt, its hammer resting on an empty chamber. He had 1 bullet left. Braxton, his performance of righteous anger shattered, saw the cold, final judgment in Cole's eyes. He screamed in pure, animal terror, turned, and fled, scrambling out a side door of the church like the rat he was. Cole did not fire. He did not chase him. The sermon was over. The message had been delivered. Braxton's authority, which he had tried to cement with fear, had been irrevocably broken in the very house of God. The town had seen him run, and a king who runs is no longer a king. The aftermath of the scattered sermon left Gray Hollow in a state of suspended animation. The battle lines, once hidden in the shadows, were now drawn in blood and splintered wood right down the center of the town. Braxton, along with Clay and the handful of enforcers who had survived the church firefight, had barricaded themselves inside the stone courthouse, their fear and rage creating a deadly, volatile fortress. The rest of the town, in a stunning and spontaneous shift of allegiance, had sided with the rebels. The sight of the mayor fleeing in terror while Cole Thatcher stood his ground like an avenging angel had shattered Braxton's reign of fear forever. The townspeople, led by Jeb and a newly emboldened Reverend Michaels, emerged from their homes not with fear, but with a quiet, simmering anger. They brought out their old hunting rifles, their shotguns, their pistols. They formed a loose, citizens' cordon around the courthouse, their grim faces a testament to a community that had finally found its spine. The ghosts of Gray Hollow had become an army, but it was a stalemate. Braxton and his men were heavily armed, with a commanding position and stone walls for protection. The townspeople, while numerous, were disorganized and lacked a true leader to guide a direct assault. That role fell, once again, to Cole. He, June, and their core group of allies set up their command post in the ruins of the saloon across the street. The mood was grim. They had won a major psychological victory, but tactically, they were in a dangerous position. Braxton was a cornered rat, and cornered rats are the most vicious. "We can't just wait him out," Jeb argued, his one eye scanning the courthouse windows. "He's got food and water in there. We don't. And he's got a telegraph wire. It's only a matter of time before he wires the territorial marshal with some trumped-up story about an insurrection, and we'll all be swinging from a rope." "A frontal assault would be a massacre," Cole countered, his voice a low rasp. "Those stone walls are a foot thick. He'd pick us off one by one from those windows." It was June who provided the key. Her mind, once clouded by trauma, was now sharp and clear, fueled by a fierce desire to see justice done for her family and for the town. For 8 years, she had been Braxton's prisoner, and she had spent much of that time locked in the cellar of the old SE office. But Braxton, in his arrogance, had also used her as a personal servant in his courthouse office, never dreaming she was absorbing every detail. "There's a weakness," she said, her voice quiet but firm, commanding the attention of the room. She sketched a quick, surprisingly accurate layout of the courthouse on a tabletop. "The building is new, but it was built on the foundation of the old territorial fort. There's a network of old storm cellars and tunnels underneath it. Braxton had most of them sealed off. But there's one he doesn't know about. An old drainage culvert that runs from the basement of this very saloon, under the street, and emerges in the evidence lockup in the courthouse basement." A plan began to form, a desperate, high-stakes gamble. They would not attack from the front. They would rise up from beneath, attacking the fortress from its soft and guarded underbelly. The mission was a suicidal one, and there was only one man with the skill and the cold-blooded courage to lead it. "I'll go," Cole said, his decision already made. "Jeb, you and the rest of the men will create a diversion at the front. Make as much noise as you can. Draw all their attention to the street. I'll go in alone." "Like hell you will," Jeb grunted. "I'm going with you." "No," Cole said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This needs to be quiet. It needs to be fast. More men means more noise. This is a job for a ghost." He looked at the faces around him, his own face a mask of cold resolve. He knew this was the final act. He had one bullet left. His journey of vengeance had led him to this dark, subterranean path, a fitting metaphor for the life he had led. He was going into the belly of the beast to face the devil himself. The siege of the courthouse had begun, and it would be a battle fought not in the light, but in the darkness under the earth. While Jeb and the townsfolk unleashed a furious, noisy, but largely ineffectual assault on the front of the courthouse, Cole and June descended into the damp, musty cellar of the saloon. The entrance to the drainage culvert was hidden behind a false wall, a forgotten relic from the town's wilder days. With a grunt, Cole pried the rotting timbers away, revealing a dark, circular opening, black as a grave. "Be careful, Cole," June whispered, her hand briefly, desperately, gripping his arm. The look in her eyes was not just of fear for his safety, but of a deep, complicated love that had survived years of separation and trauma. "The mockingbird will sing again," he said, the old code phrase now a solemn promise. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a gesture of affection so uncharacteristic it startled them both. Then he turned, lit a small lantern, and plunged into the darkness. The journey under the street was a descent into a forgotten hell. The culvert was narrow, claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. Rats skittered in the darkness just beyond the lantern's glow. The stone walls were slick with a foul-smelling ooze. For what felt like an eternity, Cole crawled and crouched, his one good hand holding the lantern, the other his Colt, his mind a blank slate of pure, focused purpose. He was no longer Cole Thatcher, the brother, the son. He was the Reaper, moving through the underworld on his way to claim a final soul. He found the exit exactly where June had said it would be, a series of loose stones in the foundation of the courthouse basement. He carefully, silently, pried them away and slipped through, emerging into the evidence lockup. He was inside. He moved up the basement stairs with the silence of a phantom. The sounds of the firefight outside were a dull, percussive roar, a perfect cover for his movements. He emerged into the ground floor hallway. Two of Braxton's men were at the front windows, firing down into the street, their backs to him. He dispatched them with a brutal, silent efficiency that was a testament to his dark craft. He used his knife, not his gun. His final bullet was not for them. He continued his ascent to the second floor, a ghost moving through a fortress under siege. He found one more guard at the top of the stairs and dealt with him in the same chillingly silent manner. He now stood once more before the heavy oak door of the mayor's office. He could hear two voices inside, Braxton's, high and strained with rage and fear, and Clay's, a low, calming rasp. He did not knock. He did not announce himself. He simply kicked the door open. Braxton and Clay spun around, their faces a mask of utter shock. For a second, they were frozen, unable to comprehend the sight of the ghost they thought was laying siege to them from the street, now standing in their sanctuary. That second was all Cole needed. Clay, the consummate professional, reacted first, his hand streaking for the pistol on his hip. But Cole was already moving. He did not fire his gun. Instead, he threw the heavy lantern he was still carrying. It arced through the air, a small, fiery comet, and shattered against Clay's chest, dousing the enforcer in burning oil. Clay screamed, a terrible, high-pitched sound, as he was instantly engulfed in flames, a human torch of writhing agony. He staggered blindly around the room, crashing into furniture before collapsing in a heap, his screams fading to a final, gurgling moan. Now, it was just Cole and Braxton. The mayor stood behind his massive desk, his face white with terror, his fine suit singed from the heat. He fumbled with the pistol in his hand, his fingers trembling too much to get a clean grip. Cole walked slowly, deliberately into the room, his own Colt now leveled at Braxton's chest. The sounds of the battle outside seemed to fade away. The world shrank to this single, opulent room, filled with the smell of smoke, burnt flesh, and 5 years of festering hatred. It's over, he lied, Cole said, his voice a low, dead thing. Please, Cole, Braxton whimpered, his bravado utterly gone, revealing the pathetic, greedy man beneath. It was the gold. Your father. He wouldn't listen. He wanted to share it with the whole damn valley. It was my discovery. My vision. It was my father's life, Cole replied, his voice flat. It was my brother's life. It was June's life. I'll give you the gold, Braxton shrieked, his eyes wild. Half of it. All of it. Just let me go. Cole looked at the man who had been his uncle, the man who had destroyed his entire world for a pile of yellow metal. He thought of his mother's sad eyes, of his father's broken body, of June's stolen childhood, of his own ruined soul. He raised the Colt, the hammer clicking back with a sound as final as a coffin lid closing. He had one bullet left, and one name. The promise he had made to his dying brother in a bloody canyon 5 years ago was about to be fulfilled. The moment stretched, taut and silent, a lifetime compressed into a single heartbeat. The roar of the battle outside, the crackle of the flames consuming Clay's body, it all faded into an indistinct hum. There was only the cavernous office, the two men who were the last remnants of a broken partnership, and the single, final bullet that connected them. Braxton, seeing the absolute finality in Cole's eyes, finally broke. A wretched, animal sob escaped his throat. Don't, he whimpered, tears streaming down his face, carving clean paths through the soot on his cheeks. For your father's memory, Cole. He was my friend. He wouldn't have wanted this. The mention of his father was a mistake. It did not soften Cole. It hardened him. It reminded him of the depth of the betrayal. My father is dead because of you, Cole said, his voice a low, chilling whisper. My mother died of a broken heart because of you. The man you're talking about, the friend, the partner. You killed him long before that mind collapsed. He steadied his aim, his finger tightening on the trigger. This was it. The end of the road. The final period on a long, bloody sentence. He looked at Braxton, no longer a powerful tyrant, but a pathetic, weeping creature, stripped of all his power and dignity, and he saw nothing. He felt no satisfaction, no release, only a vast, cold emptiness. Killing this man would not bring back his father. It would not heal his mother's heart. It would not give June back her stolen childhood. And it would not fill the hollow, aching void in his own soul. He thought of June, of the flicker of life he had seen return to her eyes. He thought of Jeb and the other ranchers, men who had found the courage to fight for something more than just survival. He thought of the town, of its chance to be reborn from these ashes, to become the decent place his father had actually dreamed of. And in that instant, Cole Thatcher understood a profound and terrible truth. His vengeance, the single, burning star that had guided him through 10 years of darkness, was a lie. It was a ghost, just like all the others, and it had been haunting him, chaining him to the very past he claimed to be avenging. Killing Braxton would not be a final judgment. It would be a final surrender to the darkness, the final act that would extinguish the last, flickering ember of Cole Thatcher and leave only the Reaper in his place. With a ragged breath, he did the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He lowered the gun. He did not lower it completely, but to his side, the barrel pointed at the floor. "No," he said, his voice thick with a pain that was deeper than anger. He wouldn't have wanted this, but he would have wanted justice. Braxton stared, his mind unable to process what was happening. He had been prepared for death, but not for this. From inside his duster, Cole pulled out the oilskin package. He threw it onto the desk. It landed with a soft thud. "The original deed, Eli," Cole said. "And the map. The town's birthright. You're not just a murderer. You're a common thief." The sound of heavy, running footsteps on the stairs broke the spell. A moment later, Jeb and Sheriff Brody, his face smudged with soot but his eyes clear and determined, burst into the room, their guns at the ready. They stopped, taking in the scene, the dead, burning enforcer, the weeping mayor, and Cole, his gun lowered, the evidence of Braxton's entire criminal empire lying on the desk. "It's over, Cole," Brody said, his voice gentle. Cole looked at the sheriff, then back at Braxton, who was now just a broken, sobbing man. Cole had made his choice. He would not be Braxton's executioner. He would be his judge. And the sentence was not a quick, clean death. It was something far worse. It was the truth. He raised his Colt one last time, but he did not point it at Braxton's heart. He aimed at the man's right hand, the hand that still held his unfired pistol. He pulled the trigger. The final gunshot was deafening. Braxton screamed as the bullet shattered the bones in his hand, his pistol clattering to the floor. It was not a killing shot. It was a branding. A final, crippling mark of justice, delivered not in vengeance, but in judgment. It was the shot that ended the Reaper, and perhaps allowed Cole Thatcher to begin to live. The arrest of Eli Braxton, and the revelation of the true deeds to the Grey Hollow Valley was a bombshell that shattered the town's fragile reality. The territorial marshal, summoned by a telegraph from Sheriff Brody, arrived a week later. Presented with the deeds, the doctor's secret journal, and the testimony of a dozen terrorized citizens, he had no choice but to take Braxton away in chains, his reign of fear and lies over. Grey Hollow was free, but it was also broken, a town forced to confront the fact that its entire existence for the past decade had been a fraud. The process of rebuilding would be slow and painful. The deeds were restored to their rightful heirs Thatcher and Pryor estates, now represented by Cole and June. They made their first official act of donation. The land on which the town itself was built was officially deeded to the township of Grey Hollow, to be governed by a newly elected council. For the first time, the town truly belonged to its people. In the quiet days that followed, Cole Thatcher was a man adrift. His war was over. His purpose, the dark star that had guided him for a third of his life, was gone. He was no longer a gunfighter, but he did not know what else to be. He found himself staying, not out of any sense of duty, but because for the first time in a decade, he had nowhere else to run to. He spent his days with June, helping her to restore their old family homestead. They worked side by side, rebuilding fences, clearing the fallow fields, the shared, simple labor a healing balm for their scarred souls. They talked, not of the dark years of their separation, but of their childhood, of their parents, of the small, happy memories that had been buried under so much pain. Slowly, tentatively, the haunted, broken woman June had began to recede, replaced by a flicker of the bright, resilient girl he had known. And in her presence, the hard, cold shell around Cole's own heart began to crack. One evening, as they sat on the newly repaired porch of the homestead, watching the sun set over the mountains, June turned to him. "What will you do now, Cole?" she asked, her voice soft. He looked down at his hands. One was scarred and calloused from a lifetime of holding a gun. The other was dry and blistered from the honest work of the past few weeks. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I only ever knew how to be one thing, and I'm not that man anymore." "No," she said, her hand gently covering his. "You're not. You're the man who came home. You're the man who saved us. You're my brother." He looked out at the valley, at the lights of the town beginning to twinkle in the dusk. He had come to Grey Hollow to bury a ghost. He had ended up unearthing a dozen more. But for the first time, they were not the ghosts of the past, of vengeance and regret. They were the ghosts of tomorrow, of possibility and hope. He still had the empty gun, the cold peacemaker. He took it from its holster, the weight of it familiar but different now, a dead weight. He opened the loading gate and looked at the 3 empty chambers where his vengeance had once resided. He thought of the 2 bullets he had spent to save himself, and the one he had chosen not to use to kill, but to judge. He walked to the edge of the property, to the small, hand-dug well his father had built. He held the gun over the dark, deep water for a long moment. Then, he let it go. It disappeared into the blackness with a soft splash, the sound barely audible. It was the sound of a promise fulfilled, and a new one being made. He walked back to the porch and sat down beside June. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he could ever truly outrun the man he had been. But as he sat there, in the quiet peace of the evening, with his sister by his side, Cole Thatcher knew he was finally, truly home. The Reaper was dead, and in the heart of Grey Hollow, a man was beginning to learn how to live.